Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast. My name is Philip Heidson, a 20-year procurement practitioner, former head of procurement and advisor to procurement leaders around the world. I started out of procurement to help leaders and their teams access the resources they need to increase their impact through insight-driven procurement. You are listening to our flagship podcast where we pull back the curtain and shine a light on the strategies, tactics, and tools that leading procurement teams are using to align their impact with the needs of their business. And in today's conversation, I am joined by friends of the show and repeat guests, Joe Payne, the SVP of Source-to-Pay at Corcentric, and Dave Quillan, the Senior Manager of Procurement at Alliant Credit Union. Now, long-time listeners may recall that we have followed Dave's journey to build a procurement team at Alliant over the last few years. And in this latest installment, we discuss specifically about delivering savings that stick through a business partnering focus. In this recording of a recent AOP Live webinar, Joe and Dave share their lessons learned in pursuit of savings and answer questions about, one, how procurement can work with leadership to not only incentivize savings, but to minimize compliance problems. We talk about ways that procurement can increase their category-specific credibility with the business, and how to build and execute a sourcing roadmap just to ensure that the annual savings targets are met. Now, given that Joe and Dave have been asked my standard intro question many times over about did you find procurement or did procurement find you, I decided to mix things up and instead ask them, and I'm going to start here with Joe, what would they be if they were not in procurement?
Yeah, and thanks for prepping me for that, because I think the answer probably would have been sitting on a beach somewhere with a Mai Tai if you didn't give me a minute or two to think about it. But, the reality is if I go back to college, I started with a business major and got a degree in business. I think my goal there was actually to run my own business.
Yeah.
And to align to that a little bit more through college, one of my part-time jobs was landscaping. Mowing lawns, doing landscaping work. So, I think the reality is I probably would have ended up somewhere in that neighborhood, probably running my own landscaping company if I didn't fall into this thing we call procurement.
So I now know when we have problems with our yard who to call.
Yeah, I haven't mowed a lawn in 10 years, so don't look at me. I outsourced that now. I did a make versus buy on that one.
Right. Dave, I'm going to ask the same question to you. What would you be if you're not in procurement?
Yeah, and like Joe said, I appreciate the prep on that. And as I think back on what I did in college, I too have a business degree in marketing, and I've always thought it'd be great to own my own business. And I've been a musician for over 20 years, and I think if I wasn't doing this, I'd probably be a live sound engineer with some bands, probably on a tour somewhere right now. So I've had that as a hobby for a while, and that would probably be, if I wasn't doing this procurement thing, that's probably what I'd be doing somewhere. So
what's your instrument?
I'm a drummer, a bass player, and a trumpet player.
Okay. So next time, if we want some mood music before we kick things off, again, we know where to call.
That's right. I got the playlist ready for you.
So I want to go into today's topics about, how do we drive savings and responsibly drive savings, savings in a way that build collaboration with our organization. That's why we kind of talk a lot about savings that stick. When we were talking in preparation for the call, Dave, you were saying that you recently got a new CEO at Alliant, and as you put it, he gets it when it comes to procurement. I just wonder if you could share what that means and how does it empower you and your team in procurement?
Yeah, thanks for that. And we did get a new CEO about a year ago, and he comes in with not only a banking background but also a supply chain background in his career. And I consider myself pretty lucky in that, because one of the things that he said almost from the get-go was, to other folks within the business, start talking to sourcing, start talking to Dave and his team in sourcing. They should be on top of these things for you, and everything, and then communicating that message to me and my team as well, that I because I know how sourcing works, I know what you can deliver, and my expectations of you are that you are delivering not only the savings but also the value, and to help us reinvest our money, our members' money wisely. Being a part of a credit union, we're a nonprofit organization, so it's he's really talked about our members' money, and I think that's really great, because sometimes we say, you know, spend money like it's your own, and I'm not a huge fan of that term. But when we say, how do we spend our members' money, that's really the key. And for our CEO Dennis Devine to say, you know, sourcing team, you guys are the ones that know how to get the most out of these relationships that we have with our third parties, and go do it. I want you to be going to do that. And to the other business units, make sure you're engaging with the sourcing team on that. And so I'm really excited that he's here and helping us to have that interaction and setting that tone at the top. Which is really key. And I think for the other folks that are on the call today, having a conversation with your executives and making sure that, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to come from the CEO. I know not everyone's in that position, but really setting that tone at the top is really key to helping make life a little bit easier for us as we go along. So if you're not getting invited to that meeting, help make sure you do, and make sure you're communicating that message and managing upwards as best you can.
Now, have you found that that's made a big difference in the perception of procurement when you have that advocate at a senior level, or at such a senior level?
I think in some cases yes, in some cases no. So it's and you know, some folks have said, that's great, I want to, you know, I don't want to be doing these things anyway, so here, go forward and do what you do best every day. And one of the big things I keep saying is, I want to put people to best and highest use, and by that I mean I want the business to be put to best and highest use, and I want my team to be put to best and highest use. And so there are some that say, yep, here you go, and others that are saying, well, okay, I'll get you involved because I, you know, quote, have to now. But then when those folks come to us, and what I tell my category managers is, that's your opportunity. Take that opportunity to show the value you can provide and you will provide to them, and make them your advocate. And in most cases, that happens. You know, we get the opportunity to work on the particular deal that's being brought to us, and we add really good value either through the process going through really efficiently, through negotiating cost avoidance or cost reduction, or creating a better business outcome for folks. And I know we're talking about savings today, but one of the messages that I've been talking to my team about is, make sure that the business unit knows, the business person knows, what business outcome do they want from the particular relationship that they have. That's going to help drive our contract negotiations. That's going to drive what we're using, what we're not using, and that's going to drive the overall relationship. And that's where your savings then can come in, through managing that demand by making sure we're getting the right business outcome from that. And as we'll talk about a little bit later, it's savings so that we can reinvest that into other things. And that's my message that I'm not only getting from the top, but that we're communicating throughout the business, is that it's not savings for savings sake, but it's savings so that you can do really cool things and invest that money in the really cool things that you want to do.
Joe, how important do you see that messaging being as you're going to the business to talk about when you are going and perhaps talking savings first, about what the purpose of doing that is, you know, and what the business ultimately is going to be doing with that money?
I mean, it's almost a deal breaker. You know, if you can't talk of it in terms of reinvestment and how that makes creates an enabler for the business, then you're always going to kind of have that perception of procurement as a cost cutter for cost cutting sake. And when that's the perception, it's very hard to get into those value-based, business outcome-based conversations. You know, I could say that, as Dave kind of outlined, the C-level role facilitating procurement's influence within the company and setting the tone. I've seen when procurement organizations are successful, it's when they have a C-level person that truly understands the value that procurement can bring. And where they lag or where they have trouble getting to that status, it's when the C-level has had, past experience where procurement is just tactical, just cost cutting, and doesn't get into those other areas. And so, it's kind of like, looking at an apple and versus an orange, right? We always talk about apples to apples conversations. If all they've ever seen is an apple, they don't know that an orange might possibly exist within that space. And so that's where, as you said, Dave, to be able to proactively, if that isn't the perception at the C-level, proactively go in to talk to them about what we know good procurement can be, and having folks that are doing category management go into the business and talk in terms of business outcomes first. The cost cutting and cost savings is always going to come, right? Yep. We're in competitive markets. If we source properly, if we build the requirements properly, there's always going to be suppliers out there willing to come in more competitively. We've got negotiation skills. We can use those to lower our prices. But that should be like a downstream impact. Mm-hmm. The upstream impact is, how are we going to help you achieve your business outcomes through the relationships you use suppliers, through the things you need suppliers for? And that's where the shift has to happen.
Now, when you're working with procurement teams, who have CEOs, COOs, whoever the most relevant person is within their organization structure, where does that perception of procurement or support of procurement come from? Is it based on, so let's say, for example, Dave talked about the support that he has from his CEO. Is in instances where you have that level of support, is it coming because of prior experience that's positive, or is it, you as an organization, as a CPO, as a procurement leader, have actually been able to change the hearts and the minds to demonstrate actually procurement can be something else? I'm wondering, is it something that's in our power or control, if you will, to change the mind of somebody who may be skeptical to the power of procurement?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I would say it's a little bit of both, right? It always helps when you have a situation where someone has come from an organization with a high functioning procurement department to already know.
Yeah.
And have that education already completed. But where that doesn't exist, and I'd say in more cases than not, it doesn't exist, it's on the head of procurement, that CPO or whoever that resource is, to create that business case and to show an end state where procurement is a value driver first and a cost savings producer second, or that they go hand in hand. And then it's about showing that from examples, right? So there's tons of times when we go into, at Corcentric, we go into an organization that's not currently center-led or centralized from a procurement perspective, and we're helping them move into that model. And so you've got folks at the C-level as well as within all the different departments that are being supported. Some folks who've already had that positive experience, some folks who may had a negative experience. And so as you go in and you start showing that, starting with the business outcomes that Dave recommended and how we're going to help you hit your budgetary goals and maybe do more with your budget because we can pull some cost out here and use it over here. I've seen it where, a marketing department went from, why do we need procurement's help, to literal standing ovations for their category manager, And those types of things happen. It's through examples and through doing our work in that way.
Now, I wonder what. Sorry, go ahead, Dave.
Oh, sorry, Phil. I just wanted the marketing example that Joe mentioned was really great, and that's actually happened to my organization as well, where my marketing category manager has come in and added so much value that I've gotten nothing but great feedback from her. And also within my technology space, regarding my technology category manager, I walk down the halls when people are in the office, and I hear, hey, Dave, our category manager is awesome. Love what he's doing. Love what he's helping us out with. And it is around, we're achieving those savings. Those savings are coming, as Joe was, mentioning as well. But we're adding that value and helping create those business outcomes that creates that really great feedback that we get to hear. So.
Yeah, and that just made me think of something, Dave, and it kind of ties into having a good sponsor at a stakeholder level, especially in marketing or a group that's responsible for corporate communications. In terms of getting that message out there, if you've got that strong relationship with marketing, they will often help you get that message out to other areas of the business as you're trying to expand influence or break down barriers with stakeholders who maybe don't want to engage. So something to keep in mind is always look for those sponsors and how can they help you communicate the value of procurement as an advocate for procurement within the organization.
Yeah, I love that point, Joe. It's something that I've enjoyed doing in transformations, is bringing in the marketing and the comms people to help you build the program and help you build the messaging. And we often don't take advantage enough of the people, the talents that we have around you. And then they become an advocate for you at the same time because they learn more about your journey that you're trying to go on. Dave, you said something about, we talked about savings and generating savings, but then you look at an organization, a stakeholder like marketing, where it's tough and you don't necessarily really want to go in and have conversations that is savings led. How much do you recommend that, or do you think about kind of savings follow, but you go in not necessarily the savings lens? So oftentimes it's easy to go in and say, okay, I need to save 5% or 10% or 20% or whatever the number, and you lead with that and that turns folks off, versus having the confidence to go in and saying, okay, I'm going to focus on the outcomes like you were saying before, and savings are going to follow. I mean, is that kind of an approach that you advocate amongst your team?
Absolutely. So we look at it two separate ways. There is one way, which is, let's focus on the business outcomes and let's make sure that we understand with all of the, contracts that are coming due within the next year, that we're getting the outcomes we want out of those, and then renegotiating either, out of a contract that may not be providing those outcomes, thus generating savings. Or renegotiating with the provider that needs, we just need to have a readjustment of the outcomes with, and then, seeing what that does. So that's kind of the one piece, is what's coming due. Let's talk about those outcomes and let's make sure that we're getting those relationships squared away so that we're getting the right business outcomes we want out of those relationships. The second piece is part of the annual planning process led by finance or FP&A. And we, in my 5.5 years here at Alliant, one of the first things I did was start getting involved in the planning process, and that's gotten better and better and better over the years. And now we're at a point where we do have aggressive savings goals set from the top, and I mentioned the tone at the top, that's helping us have these conversations. And because of that, we're now being asked to be part, where the demand is coming on our team saying, you need to be a part of this planning process so we can talk about the savings and how that's going to help with the budget and all of that. So the second way we're going out to an organization like marketing or IT or any other category is saying, okay, as part of the planning process, you're having these budgeting conversations with FP&A that my team is a part of. We're also going to have these savings conversations that are part of that as well, so that you can meet the smaller budget you may have now, because we want to fund that through the savings that we're going to do. So you may not have gotten as much money this year as you had in past years, but it doesn't mean you can't achieve your goals. We just need to look for and be creative on that savings side that we need to. And oh, by the way, those other conversations we've been having around business outcomes over here, that ties into this other place over here. Are there really things we need to be doing? And demand management is something else that comes out of this as well. That are the outcomes there? And are we getting what we need, or are there things that we're paying for that we don't need anymore because they're not generating the outcomes that we need, or those were for outcomes from 5 years ago that just never got looked at. So we're taking a really close look, really from a P&L level, to say, what can we do there to get creative to help you fund all of the things that you want to do, thus generating savings overall for the organization. And we have, seen that approach work over the last couple of years. This is last year, and then this is our second year going into that. It's going to be something we do every year from now on. So we're creating that discipline within the organization to think about that. And when you create that as a discipline, then it's something that everyone is already thinking about. So I don't have to go in, and my team doesn't have to go into an organization to say, okay, this year we got to figure out where 10% is coming from, or where 5% is coming from. We're already talking about that through planning anyway. We're identifying those opportunities. So we come into January going, all right, let's execute and let's get those things done, negotiate to the best of our ability. And we've seen over this year where we have done better in some cases, and not so better in other cases, but overall we're exceeding our goals for 2021, which I'm really excited about, because we've seen those things come in better through the negotiations that we've been able to do, and through getting creative to partner also with accounting to really look at that P&L and say, hey, how does all this work? I am not an accountant. I don't claim to play one, but they do really great things. And when you can chat with accounting about like, hey, the contract end date might be in 2022, but we've stopped using that in October. What can we do to bring that expense forward and recognize that savings and all that? Because we procurement people tend to think of things in cash basis, and accounting obviously using GAAP is much different. But when you work together with your accounting partners, you can also look for creative cost savings that way too, by things you may have effectively terminated, even though a contract end date may be coming in the future too, which is something we've seen successful being successful too.
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead, Joe.
Sorry, I was gonna just add to what Dave said there. I think if I kind of go to what does a best-in-class procurement organization look like, one that is involved in the budgeting cycle is definitely on the high on that list of things. And there's a couple reasons for it. One is it helps build that business partnering relationship. Two is it ensures that procurement is going to be proactive on an annual basis in their approach to, what are we going to go after? Why are we going after those opportunities? How do I build a staffing plan around that? What type of subject matter expertise and other tools do I need at my disposal to make sure that we're able to hit those targets and to assist the business with those goals? So I think that's kind of the best outlook you can have. Now, I would add to that, accounting is in that case, accounting is telling the business this is what we're going to give you from a budget perspective, and it's X% lower than last year. So where else can procurement help would be in helping accounting identify.
Yep.
Right, procurement's not going to be the messenger. Accounting or finance should be, but to help identify where those opportunities are, so it doesn't look like it's a straight 10% across all budgets. Right, that's the least strategic way you can do that budgeting. So how do you get really more strategic around where the opportunities are? And so almost in that pre-budgeting cycle, that planning phase, if you can provide that type of input into accounting or finance, that's kind of that's where you want to be as a procurement organization. And it's a spot that not a lot of organizations get to, right? We're still in the reactive mode where we're just trying to get to savings numbers based on some target we've internally set. And that's far less effective than being proactive and working with the business to come up with those goals.
And looking at things strategically, Joe, you brought up a really good point of, just taking a percentage is kind of the least strategic way of doing it. But when you look at your business strategy and where are those things you're going to invest in, and those places tend to get, more money, but also how do we help optimize that and really take a hard look at those opportunities too, because we're going to be spending more money there, but that doesn't mean we can't help grow that curve less than what we would, right? So if it goes, it doesn't necessarily go straight up, but it goes like at a softer curve, if you will, through opportunities we can recognize. Because in our business, and I'm sure every other one that's on the call today, there's strategic areas you want to invest in, and sometimes I can get lost and just say, okay, we're just going to go spend there and let's get cost avoidance and do RFPs and that type of thing, without looking at well, how can we be strategic about that spend too, and where are the opportunities to bring cost out of those areas so that that investment can be better, greater, and do even more good things for your customers than maybe you were thinking originally.
Yeah, last week I talked with a chief strategy officer of a public company, and he told me that even though they're in growth and the focus is not on savings, it's on growth and innovation. So long as they can ensure that SG&A, so sales, general and admin costs, are increasing at a lower rate than the revenue is increasing, then they feel like they're in a good spot. So it's not necessarily about trying to keep that number as low as it possibly can be, but helping keep an eye on it so that it's not getting out of control as they're building the infrastructure to then support the growth on the other side of the table. Yeah. I did want to ask a question about, Kelly, I'm going to come to you in a moment for a couple of questions. And please, folks, if you want to ask some questions, don't hesitate to put them in the question box. We will come to as many of those as we can do shortly. But I wanted to carry on the theme of finance. Something that you both talked about was the messaging, in terms of you've worked with FP&A. Perhaps there are budget restrictions that are being placed on stakeholders. How important is it that that comes from FP&A and finance and accounting, and it doesn't come from you? Because so many times I see it being the procurement leading the message, saying, hey, I'm coming and I've got to save you 10%, and that money that is then going to get taken out of your budget, and that's when the gates go up immediately.
Yeah, I from a practitioner standpoint, I'll just say that messaging definitely should be coming from finance. That is their message to send. But I would add, do that in partnership with finance. It can be a good cop, bad cop situation, but do that together in partnership. And I have found that building that strong relationship with FP&A is really key. So it's their message to send, because they are the owners of the budget. And what I like to say is, we in sourcing, we don't give you any money. Our job is to help you spend what finance gives you to the best of your ability and as wisely as possible. But do that in partnership with, okay, you've heard that from FP&A. Now here's how I'm going to come help you get there. And here's some things we've identified. Let's talk about that. Let's have those conversations and go from there. Joe, what do you think?
No, absolutely. And that I was going to caution in my last comment around, when you're feeding information to accounting and finance as a procurement organization, sometimes that gets translated back to the business. Procurement said we can save you 15%, right? And that's what you want to avoid. But I agree completely with that partnership approach. And the way you put it, that we're not here to tell you what you can spend. We're basically here to help you do as much as you can with the dollars that you do have. That's the way you want to put it. And that's kind of the culture you want to set as the organization as well. And it requires alignment with finance, because they will point back to procurement if they don't want to be the bad cop. So yeah, it's good to have a communication plan in regards to those types of things.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Dave.
Sorry, Phil. I actually have my category managers, my marketing category manager came to me and said, hey, we, in the finance meetings, they started talking about vendor spend and that type of thing. And I said, well, why don't you partner with your FP&A partner on a monthly basis prior to those budget review calls, and then you two align on those things so that you go into that call already prepared for those questions. And that's been going really, really well over the last couple of months. I was really glad that that idea came to me, and that's an idea I want to spread, wide as well. I think that's worked out really, really well. So if you have a finance partner, meet with them prior to the budget meetings and align on what you're going to talk about, and you guys can go in there and have a really productive conversation.
No, it's a good discussion when we're all jumping in on top of each other. So I'd rather that than silences. I am actually just going to ask one follow-up before I go over to Kelly, because it's still related to finance and FP&A. Joe, I'll ask you this first of all. How important is it in having formal governance with FP&A or with finance when it comes to the identification, tracking, claiming of savings, so that everybody knows, everyone's kind of on the same page? Do you find that to be impactful?
Oh, absolutely. And it's another basically base requirement and starting in a centralized procurement organization or improving one that already exists. The worst thing that can happen is when procurement says, oh, this is the savings that we achieved this year, and finance looks at a budget and says, nope, I don't see it in here. What are you talking about? And so, as Dave alluded, the best thing is to understand going in that in some ways finance speaks different language than procurement, right? When we talk about savings, what do we really talk about? We're talking about procurement impact. You would have you spent this and now you spent this, and that's not really the way finance looks at it, right? I mean, there's GAAP accounting and there's principles tied to that. There's also just budget to budget. Last year we spent $1 million. This year we spent $2 million. What happened? Well, your volume doubled, right? But they're not seeing that. And so you have to get on that same page early. I would say take accounting's lead or finance's lead in how they want to quantify things and align that as much as possible. You can always have metrics around procurement impact, but if you want to be on the same page as finance, you're going to have to speak in their language to some extent, or at least take their lead.
And that's a struggle that a lot I have struggled with and had some hard conversations over the last couple of years as well to get on that same page. But that going through that struggle is important to get to that better point. And we now have, because of that, I now have more productive conversations. I can talk in terms of finance and those that language, Joe, that you mentioned. And so it's not an easy process, and it's one that does take time to build because there's some trust that has to be built there with finance and accounting. But when you get there, it's worth it. And when you agree on what those metrics are, because like you said, well, I spent $1 million this year and $2 million this year for sourcing. Why are you saying you saved us money? You didn't. Right. And now we're having the conversation of, okay, we know our volume is going to double, but the rate on this thing went down by 20%. So on the same volume, that's where we'll agree that we can call that, savings and cost reduction, and then cost avoidance is anything on the additional volume that's coming. And those are some tough conversations we have to have, but now we know how to have them, which I think is really, really key. So I encourage everybody on the call to plan for that, but don't be afraid of having those tougher conversations. They're very much well worth it in the end.
Yeah, and from my personal experience, the sooner, when you look at it from a sourcing project perspective, the sooner that you can agree what the methodology is and the way that you're going to calculate that methodology, the better, because then when you've completed the project, it's just a matter of plugging in the numbers based on what you've already agreed with finance and the stakeholder, the way that you're going to track the value that's delivered. One of the traps that we get into is this perception that, we come to the end of the project and then we're trying to figure out, okay, how can I kind of position this that demonstrates the most savings? If I calculate it this way, savings come up that way. If I calculate it another way, and again, that loses some of the trust I think that finance has in the numbers that we end up submitting to them. I've teased this for a little while. Kelly, I'm going to come to you and ask you if we've got any questions coming in from today's audience.
We do actually have some questions that have come in, and there are actually two in particular that I really like because I think Joe and Dave, you guys will have slightly different perspectives on them. So Joe, starting with you, you talked about the importance of procurement playing an active role in the budgeting process. And for a lot of companies, that's happening right now. It's maybe starting, it's maybe already thoroughly underway. If procurement is not currently playing that active role in the budgetary process, do we crash the party? Do we invite ourselves to the conversation? Is it something that needs to happen at the CFO level that then trickles down? How do we start that process, whether we can affect it this year or whether it's something that we lay the groundwork for this year and work towards for next year, to insert procurement into those conversations early enough that we're able to have an impact?
Yeah, I would say it kind of goes back to a theme we've been referring to all along in this conversation, which is it's always best to be proactive in your approach. So if you know it's budgeting season and this finance group hasn't tapped you on the shoulder to get your input on that, then you tap them on the shoulder, right? And what are we bringing to the table to finance? We have good insight into spend, hopefully, right? We know what we're spending. We know what we've accomplished in certain categories in the past. If it's a publicly traded company or if it's been communicated, you already probably have a good sense for what the goals of the organization are for next year. And if cost cutting is a theme tied to that, or getting more efficient, increasing EBITDA, things like that, then you can proactively go to the CFO or the head of finance in charge of budgeting and talk to them about what data and insights you can provide to help them identify where cost out exists. And so I would just encourage that conversation should be happening. And if you haven't already been tapped, then don't be afraid, as Dave said, to go out and have that dialogue proactively.
Well, and it's interesting, Joe, that you mentioned what Dave had said, because that was actually going to be my follow-up. So Dave, you talked about encouraging your category managers to build individual relationships with FP&A and have regular contact with them. Do you think that works because you do have that support that we've talked about at the CEO level, that you can then build those individual conversations on sort of the expectation that's already been set? Or do you think it's effective because when you do something sort of one-on-one or person-to-person, it's a little bit less intimidating than, hi, we're procurement, we're here to completely change your process? What have you observed from those individual interactions?
Yeah, I think it's really the latter. I would be encouraging those conversations, whether or not we had that support from the CEO. I think what I've observed is that the budgeting conversations and the budget review conversations are a lot more productive when sourcing and FP&A have had that pre-meeting to say, okay, here's what I'm seeing from the finance side of the spend. How does that match up to things you're seeing on the sourcing side? Anything else that we need to be bringing up, and then you go into that conversation being on that same page. We've been a part of the finance budgeting conversations for a few years now, and prior to this idea coming to light, we've gotten into those conversations, and then we've said, finance is saying, I see the spend, I really don't know what's going on, sourcing, what's going on, and we're like, oh yeah, here it's, this, that, and the other thing. But then it's a dialogue between sourcing and finance instead of the business. And so getting out of that, like, here's the spend I see, what do you, see, do all that ahead of time, and then go into the conversation. You're able to talk to the business person and really understand their goals, and then come away with that from a sourcing standpoint of how do you continue to affect their goals. So I think no matter what your support is from the executive level, I encourage everyone to encourage their teams to have those individual conversations. Kelly, you mentioned it's less intimidating to have those one-on-one conversations and than it is to, hi, I'm here to help type of thing, as we've talked about before. So I'm from sourcing and I'm here to help. We are very much there to help, but I think getting those squared away first is going to have a much better impact than doing the broader thing, and then support that when the broader communication does come out.
Right. No, absolutely. And Dave, when you talk about these relationships with the business, one of the excellent questions that I got early on, so we could sort of back up our mindset for a minute back to when you were talking about procurement focusing on and communicating about business outcomes and the savings following. I actually have a great question that's come in. So how does procurement handle it in those cases where you focus on the business outcomes or the business case or the drivers, but the savings don't follow? How do those conversations go? So I'll start with you on this, Dave, and then I'll come to you, Joe, for additional comment.
So great question. So obviously it's a tougher conversation to have, but I think we have to look at what is the overall business case for moving that deal forward then. So what other value are we getting out of that? So if we're not getting, you know, the savings that we were thinking, there's still value we're getting out of that. So does everything, all the services that are part of that contract, do they match with the outcomes we're trying to get? Is there going to be a process efficiency that is gained from this relationship? Is there going to be a better, you know, customer experience that we're going to get from this relationship that will lead to further sales or revenue down the line? We need to think about it in a little bit different terms to say, look, I know this deal we're not getting savings out, but here's all the business outcomes we're going to get that makes this worth it. And if we can have that conversation well, then we've done our job. If we can't defend that, then we really need to take a hard look at how well we negotiated that deal. So I encourage you, the person that asked that question, to look at that deal holistically and make sure that we are able to defend the business outcomes that are going to come of that relationship, and make sure all that's in the contract. So one of the, you know, one of the things that we all kind of fall into is that, like, oh, everything's, you know, everything through the sales process it's going to be great, but let's make sure that is actually in the contract so we can hold them accountable to that while we're going through the relationship, and regular touch bases with that provider, especially those that you're not getting that savings on, that you want to make sure that they continue to deliver that. So set those up as well.
That's great. Joe, any comments that you wanted to add to that before I hand back to Phil?
Yeah, definitely. You know, again, I would say in a procurement organization, the one thing you want to avoid is cost savings is always going to be a part of the conversation, but let's not make that the primary driver or the foundational element. And so if you think about in a particular requirement that's being sourced and the savings not coming to fruition, well, how do you rationalize decisions around what the work that was done there? So think about when you're sending out an RFP to suppliers, right? A lot of times you'll send a list of, here's the criteria we're going to evaluate you on as part of this RFP, and sometimes we'll even provide weightings. This is most important. It's, you know, we're weighting it at 50%, 40, 30, whatever. And cost savings or budgetary impact is always going to be a component of that. So when you're laying out the plan to source or to be to participate and lead a sourcing event for a requirement, set those parameters up front. You know, Dave laid a few of them out. Business outcomes. What are we trying to achieve? Do we expect that this supplier will help us grow our business or our revenue targets? Are we looking for a way to eliminate risk through dual source of supply? Are we addressing quality issues with our current supplier? You know, and the whole host of other things, you know, sustainability, inclusion, all those things impact why we go out to market, right? And so savings or budgetary impact is going to be one of them. How are we weighting that? We don't have to share all that with the suppliers, but at least internally we know, so that at the end, if we don't produce the savings we achieved, we can see how important was that as part of this project. Yes, it was a parameter, but maybe it was a small one. Okay, that's fine. If it was the top one, the top reason was cost cutting and we didn't find it, well then there's a problem, and we have to have the dialogue around, do we need to reduce our quality? Do we need to look at demand? What other levers can we pull here? But ultimately, it's just a matter of setting the right balance up front of where the importance is, and then when you're done with the project, being able to restate which of those goals did you hit, and what do we expect to get from that.
So not artificially limiting ourselves right? Just to
Yes.
savings, talking about that broader value. Awesome. Thank you guys. Phil, back to you.
Thank you, Kelly. And so I want to jump on that because we got questions from Gustavo and Brant around this kind of topic of measurement of impact. And the question from Gustavo is it time to replace the savings KPI with one or more other KPIs to better evaluate and demonstrate procurement's contribution to the organization? And, you know, as we answer that, I don't think that savings, for organizations that track savings today, savings isn't going to go away. Now there's organizations who are building from scratch who are able to do so without having a savings number as part of their scorecard. But what are you seeing, Joe, in terms of a more balanced scorecard and moving to a more balanced scorecard that demonstrates value that does go beyond the savings?
Yep, it's another one of those must-haves, I would say. We're always going to see savings in it, but there's so many other things we can measure that show, you know, the impact procurement can have as it relates to supplier management, sourcing, etc. You know, there's speed, availability, risk mitigation, service levels, innovation, diversity targets, sustainability targets. All these types of things, they should be in our scorecard, and depending on the applicability of them in a particular category of spend, we should be leveraging those things.
So,
Yeah.
So go ahead, Dave, and I want to ask a follow-up as well to Joe on that. But how do you kind of think about that as a practitioner when, you know, you're having the conversations every day with your CFO or head of finance around savings?
Yeah, I agree with Joe there. From it's part of the scorecard, and I think that it's not going away. Savings is not going away, and I tell that to my team as well. But it's just part of what we do. You know, contract renewal is also getting in there as well, and some of the other things that Joe mentioned. Spend compliance. How well are people complying with your, you know, the policies you have set up there too, in addition to those. So, well, there's lots of things that measure sourcing and procurement's value. Savings is one of those things, but it should not get lost in the overall value that we're providing to the organization.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really important.
So the follow-up that I wanted to ask, and actually I'd love both of your opinions on this, but I'm going to ask you, Joe, first. Oftentimes, procurement teams will say, well, I've only been given savings as my objective. So the question is, like, should we be waiting for permission to report on the value that we drive that goes beyond savings, or should we be proactively going and providing that information, even if it doesn't necessarily tie directly with our objectives, because it starts to help us have a conversation?
Yeah, I think we have to start having that dialogue, even if it's not what we're measured on today, so that the leadership or whoever's, you know, measuring the effectiveness of procurement at a C level can start seeing that light of what else procurement can bring. You know, we've talked a lot on different AOP sessions around the impact of the pandemic on organizations, right? And, you know, even in areas of indirect spend, what a proper supplier risk strategy and supply outage mitigation strategies can do. And it's unfortunate that we have to point to something like the pandemic to see all these different business cases of how bad, or I guess gaps in supply chain management can have a clear impact on a company's bottom line. But the reality is, the most important things that your third parties bring to you are not cost savings. It's something else.
Yep.
You know, it's supply that could impact your bottom line, your top line. It's risk around things like supply outages, but also, you know, digital, you know, hacking and things like that. So we have to get more business focused. And if the leadership doesn't already have that mindset that there's more procurement should be doing, then we have to create that perception for those leaders and make them advocates for that type of measurement.
Yeah, and I would add to that, not only start doing that and start having those conversations, but go to those conversations with a dashboard in mind, or with something to show in mind, and say, you know, here are all the things that we're doing. Here's what we've done, since the pandemic, Joe. I think that's a great point that you brought up, that really did highlight, the importance of supply chain management, and doing that well. Here's all the things that we have done that aren't just about savings. And Joe, you said it really well. These third parties aren't here to generate cost savings for us. They're there to provide value to the organization. Being a financial services organization, we can outsource things. We can't outsource the risk. And, that just means that there's a function they're providing that is an extension of your organization. So you want to make sure that they're providing it in the best way and most cost-effective way that they possibly can. So what are they trying to bring to your business and your customers as a result? So absolutely agree with Joe. We need to be more business focused, and when we are, that helps us have that conversation around the greater value that we add to the organization. So, and I think that'll help leaders get it too, that, hey, okay, I know that sourcing and procurement is more than just tactical savings, but we're looking at the broader relationships, the business outcomes. Have those conversations and put your teams to best and highest use.
Now, Kelly, if time allows, I may come back to you for one more question, but I want to ask one more of Joe and Dave, and it's a question we got from Nelly. It's like an age-old question, really, that we're all faced with when we're tracking savings. What are your thoughts on how to get recognition for the efforts required to deliver cost avoidance? Joe, first of all, what's your opinion of cost avoidance?
Well, I think Dave gave a good illustration of what cost avoidance really is. You think about budgetary impact. Quite frankly, though, I just don't like the term. I'd rather move it to procurement impact. I don't know why, but I think of cost savings and cost avoidance in reality as the same thing, because it's what you would have spent had procurement not been involved. And so when we start, getting in that dialogue with finance, I feel like we're heading down the wrong path. And if they want to go, okay, well, what's budgetary? And well, this is your budgetary savings, but this is your procurement impact savings. And them understanding what that means is a good thing. But of course, that doesn't resonate in every organization either. So I will always default that if you can make a business case that cost avoidance is cost savings, do it. If not, then find a plan B that works. And of course, usually plan B is where you end up.
Yeah, and I like the term, Joe, procurement impact, and I think I've always talked about it in that terms. And as I mentioned earlier, having the hard conversations with finance around, cost, we talk about it in terms of cost reduction and cost avoidance. And what I'd say is the cost avoidance is what you would have spent had procurement not been involved, exactly what you said, and that is our impact to the organization. So I've been saying those types of things. We probably all have been saying it in one way or another, but instead of having your graph say cost avoidance, maybe we change that to procurement impact. I really like that, but we have to be talking about that because that is really important work that we do. Yeah. I had my technology category manager with over $1 million in cost avoidance on a deal, and I just thought that's such a big impact. We would have had not used his knowledge, and his expertise, we would have spent over $1 million more than we needed to on something, and that is a tremendous impact that I highlighted to our CEO and to the rest of our executive team. Like that's a big deal, and that is a very big value that we are bringing to the table that no one else could have done. So I think we really need to be talking about those in terms of our impact. Some are small, that's a big one, and some are smaller, but cumulatively they create a large impact for the organization. I think we need to highlight that.
Okay, Kelly, I'm going to come to you. We've got 5 minutes to go in today's session. Do we have any last questions from the audience that you'd like to pose to Dave or to Joe?
We do. So this question comes from Malik. Joe, I'll start with you, and then Dave, we'll give you the last word on this. He's asking a question about setting savings targets, which in the context of today's conversation, I can actually think of two ways. right? So we talked about it in the budgetary cycle where you say, okay, procurement's going to save you 15%. Now, where that comes from, that's for procurement and the business to figure out together. Versus going into a specific sourcing project, you could be weeks or multiple steps into that process before you know on a granular level what the savings potential is within that contract or category of spend. Joe, what advice would you have around setting these different levels of savings targets? When the timing is right, what the input should be, what the conversation should be like between procurement and the business?
Yeah. I would say there's a couple different elements to that. First of all, the procurement organization, before they can start divvying out what a target should be, really need good spend visibility, right? What are we spending today? How does that cross over different budgets, right? Similar requirements across multiple different groups within the company. Are there leveraging opportunities or not? And then, tying that to, before you're going out and sourcing it to actually know what you might save, understanding the complexity of the category, the complexity of the service level requirements, an understanding of the supplier landscape and the competitiveness of the market. Are there suppliers out there that are willing to compete for that business? And if so, how many and how much supply is available today? And so having good benchmarking data is, I think, a really important part of that alignment with finance and being able to help finance determine where savings should be, what kind of budgetary targets they should be giving out to the business. And so you might have that internally to some extent, right? If you've got someone like Dave just mentioned, his IT category manager maybe had a past job where they worked with a supplier and they saw a particular price point or savings range, and you can use that as a way to identify opportunities. But there's also, organizations out there like Corcentric that can provide you with both spend visibility as well as with different elements of market intelligence to help you create those strategies. And so it's not uncommon for procurement organizations to use third parties for that type of market intelligence and that type of support, so that you can be educated about where the savings exist and have data points tied to that before you go out into the market and source.
Dave, any thoughts that you wanted to add to that? I'll give you the last word in today's session.
Thanks, Kelly. I think having the data is incredibly important, and having that insight into the spend is incredibly important. And I want to add one other thing, and that is addressable spend. What is our addressable spend to go after? Because, in 2022, you may have 3 years left on a particular contract. You can't affect that in that year. So as you're going through that spend analysis, and there are great third parties out there, and I think that you need to have that data, and we're lucky enough to have that data, and I have it just in the last couple of years as we've been building up. So if I've built this organization from scratch, and now that I have this, we're having much better conversations. So I encourage all of you, if you don't have this available now, go find it, go source that. That should be on your list for 2022, because that is incredibly important to drive all of these things we've been talking about today.
All right, thank you, Kelly. It's just hitting the top of the hour. So Dave, Joe, I want to thank you so much for your time, for sharing the benefits of all your experience on this topic. It's one that won't go away for procurement, for sure, but a lot of discussion around how we can think beyond savings while not losing track and losing sight of the fact that we have to deliver on that for us really to be taken seriously in a number of organizations where savings is still important. So really appreciate you joining us, and I'm sure we will all talk again soon. Thank you everyone else as well for being a part of our conversation today. I want to thank you for listening into today's episode of The Art of Procurement. To go deeper, including access to transcripts and actionable outtakes from the podcast, join the free level of our AOP Mastermind community. To learn more, go to artofprocurement.com/mastermind. And to find our entire back catalogue of almost 400 episodes, go to artofprocurement.com/podcast.